But I think we're relatively in sync.
Relatively in sync. That's the boy band.
Yes,
that's the documentary. Yeah.
Cover band of the Backstreet Boys.
Hello, you are listening to Off Radar, It's a Movie podcast. I'm James Smith, a professional film and video editor.
I'm James Eatock, a freelance writer and illustrator specialising in 1980s cartoons.
And I'm Neil Brock, aka Nige, the man with two names, former film journalist and currently working in the games industry.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone and let you all know exactly what we thought of it.
I'd never really had any interest in watching it and I was proved absolutely right.
I think it's amazing. I really, really love this film.
The film's still a pile of steaming dog shit.
If you fancy joining in and suggesting a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off Radar Podcast
or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and by all means, leave a review.
For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar. I just need a really quick wee-wee, then we'll crack on.
I need to do a wee-wee here.
I did my wee-wee.
Hello and welcome to Off Radar. How you doing? I'm James Smith and I'm joined by slightly giggly and squeakly James Eatock.
I just liked your how you doing? That's a nice new like version of the introduction. Yeah, how you doing? Yeah, I'm good, Smith, and hello to everybody that's listening.
Good, and also Neil Brock. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. It just catches you so off guard, doesn't it?
It really does.
I'm not ready for that.
Hi.
But yeah, and we call Neil by his alter ego, Nige, like what I've done there.
That makes it sound very nefarious, like, yeah, his alter ego. That's when he goes out fighting crime at nights.
Or,
yeah. Or you should see me in the jail cell.
Yeah, exactly. Today we are discussing Primal Fear, which came out in 1996. Now, this episode was actually suggested by a listener. The first episode Michael Burlow suggested was Surf Ninjas, and the second was on a very similar kind of frame with Primal Fear.
They're basically the same film.
Pretty much. It was loosely based.
Same quality of actor as well in both. You know.
The film was directed by Gregory Hoblit. It was based on a book by Steve Shagan. I like to call him Shagan.
Get that right, Smith.
Shagmeister.
The Shagger, that's what they call him. And Biderman did the screenplay.
Spider-Man? What?
Spider-Man wrote the screenplay.
What?
And it stars...
That's why there's so much like tangled web in this.
Oh, he's good. Nige, he never stops. Never stops thinking that, Nige.
Never stops. That's what they say.
I'm done for this episode. You won't hear.
That's it, he's out.
That's his trivia. It stars Richard Gere, Laura Linney, and
Linney. Linney.
It's because the way I wrote it. I'm gonna do it again, but I'm probably gonna have to.
Yeah.
No, you definitely should. Yeah. It's fine.
Leave it in
appreciate that.
Laura Linney, or Laura Linney, as she likes to be called to people who don't know her as well. And Ed Norton, who is incredibly young, and a few others who we will mention as we go through it. Firstly, had you guys seen this film before we did it for the pod?
Well, for me, I saw it years ago. At least I think I did, but I couldn't remember anything about it. So I watched it not that long ago, maybe the last couple of years. And again, when this came up, when Berlin sort of requested that we review it, I couldn't remember anything about it again. So I had to watch it again. So every time I watch it, it's like, I don't remember anything about this. And then this last time, after about 20 minutes, I was like, oh, I remember what happened. But yeah,
I saw this, I want to say around about, first time about 2001 or 2. I dated a girl and she said, this was when I was much skinnier and didn't have much facial hair. She said I reminded her of Ed Norton. So I used to do my Ed Norton impression.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say Laura Linney.
Yeah. Laura. So as soon as she told me that, I thought I better watch this Ed Norton character in a film. I'd already seen him in Fight Club, but yeah, I watched Primal Fear, and like you guys, when this episode came up as you got to watch this, I was like, oh yeah, I think I remember. I remember the end. I didn't remember anything before the end. So watching this was like watching a new film for the first time.
And well, funnily enough for me, so first of all, in the 90s, I remember always seeing the poster for this film, like late 90s, early noughties, and thinking, oh, that looks really boring. I'm probably never going to watch it.
Because I thought you were going to say it's like an iconic poster. I think the poster really does stand out. And every time I see it, I'm like, ooh, that looks interesting.
Do you? Because I don't. The poster just doesn't sell it.
It looks like a horror film poster. Here's Exorcist 4.
Exactly. It doesn't say anything to me. But anyway, so I watched it for the first time when Michael suggested it, which was actually, he suggested it quite a few months ago, maybe 3 months ago. Watched it with my wife. And then we were set to do the podcast, and I had to rewatch it because, like you guys, but this was only 3 months old, I couldn't really remember it, and I was like, shit, I have to watch it. Wait a second. So I watched it for the podcast, and now I've had to rewatch it.
So the three of us have already laid claim to see it once and remembered nothing about it.
We might have to watch it again while we're doing the podcast.
I saw it twice and couldn't remember anything about it, so yeah.
Okay. So I'm
on 3 now. With that, I can remember something for this episode.
I was going to say.
So yeah,
with
my
that
memory
in mind,
of this
synopsis.
This is why I wrote the synopses. So, okay, here's my synopsis that I wrote. It's Chicago, the 1990s.
Oh.
An archbishop is murdered, and Aaron Stampler, Ed Norton, seems to be the prime suspect. Defense attorney Martin Vale, Richard Gere, who has spent his career getting many a suspicious character cleared, decides to represent him, not because he believes it's the right thing to do, but because he knows it's going to be He knows it's going to be a high-profile case. His on-off girlfriend, Janet Venable, Laura Linney, who is also an attorney, is hired by the state to prosecute and find Ed Norton guilty. But things aren't what they seem with Ed Norton's character, or with the murdered archbishop. Also, Frances McDormand is in this movie as a psychologist. And even though I think Nomadland was garbage, I think she's great in 99% of her film roles. So yeah.
Like how you managed to get Nomadland into your Primal Fear synopsis.
But yeah, I think that's a very accurate.
Thanks for reminding us of what it's about.
This is going to be an interesting review.
On my first day of law school, my professor says, from this day forward, when your mother says she loves you, get a second opinion.
In the game called fame.
You are a master at putting the victim on trial.
A victim in this case is my client.
In the business called justice.
First thing I ask a new client is, so you've been saving up for a rainy day? Guess what? It's raining.
The victim in this case is not only the Archbishop, it's also the people of Chicago.
Excuse me.
Law offices of Martin Vale.
You got the news on by any chance? I think everyone's gonna want this one.
There's one lawyer they love to hate.
Sell the book rights yet, or you gotta wait a while?
Now tell me, counselor, which one of us is the true headline chaser here?
Unlike you, I was assigned to this case.
You know who I am?
No, sir, I don't.
Don't you read the papers?
I think maybe for me, kicking off, a good start to talk about is the fact that I realised when I watched this film that I had barely seen any Richard Gere films. I'd seen Pretty Woman, and that was about it. And I kind of watched this and thought, oh, it's Richard Gere being Richard Gere again.
The thing with Richard Gere is he was an absolutely huge star.
Oh, massive.
Sort of maybe like the 80s more so than anything else. Like Officer and a Gentleman was obviously huge. You mentioned Pretty Woman. But then the sort of list tends to run out a little bit. There obviously are other films that he's done that are probably extremely high profile, but none of them jump into my head. And it's
the last big movie I remember seeing him, I'm looking at his Wikipedia as we're doing this right now. The last big movie I remember seeing him in, I did see it, was Chicago. The movie adaptation of the stage play. But I remember one of the big films, and I think he was in his prime in the 80s, he was like a huge sex symbol because of An Officer and a Gentleman, but also because of he was in that film American Gigolo.
Oh yeah,
which I don't.
That's
if you've ever
right. Yes.
That film, like I remember, I've seen that maybe once in passing. One of those where if we were to review that for the podcast, I'd have to rewatch it. But it's. I remember it being very dark, very very interesting film, but very raunchy, and I think that's how he kind of got that state. And you think about all the actors that came up at the same time that he was competing with, like your De Niro's and people like that, and he still made a name for himself as like box office. But you look at his history of films, you're like, yeah, he's done some good stuff.
He's done some stuff, but when George Clooney probably came around like maybe a bit later, but like very 90s, kind of similar kind of feel in some of the roles he's done. But like straight away in this film, in Primal Fear, Richard Gere, he's in a suit for pretty much 90% of this film. He's very charming, he's very cool in this film, and he's having not seen very many Richard Gere films. I was instantly like, I felt like I was like in a warm place with Uncle Richard.
Uncle Richard.
But his character is an interesting one in this film because obviously, like you said, he's playing a defense attorney, and obviously the morality of playing this kind of role is quite interesting, and it comes up in the film a bit later on. But the fact that he's obviously defending an accused murderer.
I mean, but that's, I think, where it's kind of genius casting, because Richard Gere, he can do super duper handsome dude, but he can also do smug, shit-eating grin, super handsome dude. You know what I mean? It's that
it's that just confidence, almost too
it's
much
like
confidence.
it's the confidence bordering on arrogance.
I speak, you do not speak. Your job is just to sit there and look innocent.
Well, I am innocent.
That's it. That's exactly how I want you to look. Can you remember that? Look in the mirror if you have to.
For Gere, I mean, I remember seeing like I think it was in Internal Affairs that he did that was quite good as well. That was just before Pretty Woman. He did like Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts. He did that First Night with Connery.
Was that like a sequel to Pretty Woman? No, that was like it was
the same cast, but it was like it had no real attachment to that film other than the fact it was Roberts and Gere again. But like he does play that particular role of kind of like a slightly slimy but then confident and very smooth guy exceptionally well. Like in this film, although there's like a really strong cast in this film, from like the leads down to the supporting, he is largely the person who's got to carry this film. It will only work if his role is believable, and I think that he does a really impressive job. And you kind of forget about Richard Gere, I think, after all the stuff where he kind of almost like retired, I would say, to an extent from acting. He was very much into his meditation and sort of freeing Tibet, and there was a lot of that sort of in his career where he did a sort of a big step back. And this is actually a really nice reminder of actually, Richard Gere can act. But the kind of the slightly uncomfortable thing is, obviously, you mentioned his love interest, Laura Linney.
I don't even know anymore.
No, Laura Linney mentioned her, and she's a good 10 to 15 years younger than his character in this film, and it's just like, it's fine, they're just having sex, it's fine, which is a very classic 90s 80s type. Well, even these days it's very often the male lead is significantly older than the female.
They've kind of straight away, like, there's no beating around the bush that both of those characters have this not just sexual chemistry, but it's like right from the off that they've been together, but then that is played on throughout the whole film. So wherever there's a courtroom scene or I
really love their chemistry.
Exactly. The chemistry between
she's fantastic.
The two is great, but she stands up for herself. She's not like she is a really strong character in this film, which is key, and the fact that when he is kind of interacting with her, she's not weak. She always kind of, and interestingly, with all of the supporting cast in this, there's this kind of wrestling between minds and ideas, particularly obviously Ed Norton, which we'll get to in a second. But the fact that when they're on screen, there's this horrible sexual tension at times where you kind of like. You like you said, Richard Gere is like definitely the main character in this film, but at the same time, I'm not sure how likeable he is at times in this film, which is very interesting.
Not.
He's not supposed to make us feel anything but kind of uneasiness around him. He may be the male lead, but he's not the heroic lead, as it were. And I think they're very honest about that. His character is, otherwise they'd be making his character, they'd be swapping them. Yeah. He'd be the prosecution, like JFK, for instance, the movie JFK, where you've got Kevin Costner as the heroic man that wants to do what's best. You reverse that role and he becomes like part of the defense.
You knew I was coming here, didn't you? You knew I would defend him. That's why you took the case. You asked Shaughnessy for this, didn't you?
Oh, please. What's the matter, Marty? You nervous? Been a while since you rubbed up against a woman with a brain?
There's moments where he, like later on in the film, he's slightly more conflicted, where he has like a meeting in a bar, and or even when he goes first to the flat to see the murder scene, and you can see in his eyes that he's like, bloody hell, like, someone has died here, and there is that kind of conflict in his head, which the viewer obviously is, like for me, like when you first watch this film, you're always questioning like the morality of the defense in general, and I think this film does a really good job of not only making you question it, but also say the reasons why a defense is important, which is also a really good point on prosecution and defense just in general. And I imagine in the book this is probably where Nige comes in with some trivia, but must have been written by somebody who had a past in law and stuff like that.
Well, you say that, like, when you get to the court scenes, there was bits where I was, like, going, objection, because it was like, there's no way in an actual sort of, having seen far too many episodes of, like, your CSIs and silly courtroom things, there's so many things where you just think, there's no way he would have got away with that. So I'm not sure. I don't actually know about that much about the book, whether or not it was written by someone with a background in law or anything like that. But just quickly coming back to Richard Gere's character, I don't think he's that far removed from sort of is it Michael Gecko in Wall Street, in terms of that? It's all about the money, it's the fame, it's the power, the feeling that he's always one step ahead. And I know that's very 80s, and obviously this is sort of mid-90s, but I think it's almost like a continuation of that type of character. But yeah, like you mentioned, obviously Laura Linney's character being, I think she probably gives a lot more to the role than there probably was on the page.
Definitely.
So as you said, like she comes across really well in the film. She's really confident. She doesn't really take any of his shit, which for him is that kind of weird thing where it's like, oh yeah, I kind of like this, because I can imagine he's the sort of person that bulldozes over people with his charm, with his looks, everything else like that. And she absolutely stands up for herself. But like I said, a lot of the times when we get towards the end of the film, where it's the sort of more, where it is the court section, there's just bits where it's so obvious and so like ridiculous, I guess, in some respects, that it sort of stretched the realm of believability for me. But yeah, those two, as you said, great chemistry.
Do you fancy sending us a film to review, or letting us know your thoughts on a film that we have discussed? All of your comments will be read out in our end of season leaderboard episode. Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com, tweet us at offradarpodcast, message us on Facebook. All links and info in the description down below.
Do it! Do it!
Ed Norton. So obviously, when I first watched this film, I didn't look at the cast at all, and like the poster is, like you said, like an oil painting of Richard Gere. So when you see this film, I didn't even know Ed Norton was in it. And to be fair, I don't think in the opening credits.
Well, it was his first ever film, and he auditioned. There was 2,100 people.
Oh, here comes the trivia! Here comes the trivia.
Well, there were, and I counted them. No. So yeah, there was over 2,000 people who auditioned for the role. Names that were linked with this: Leonardo DiCaprio was offered it.
Wow.
Just come off of shooting whilst eating Gilbert Grape, and was like, I'm too exhausted to do this film. There was like so many sort of quite well-known names that did it. I think that were considered, like James Marsden, who played like Cyclops in the X-Men films, for instance. He was someone who was considered for it as well. James Van Der Beek, aka Dawson.
Oh wow,
Dawson's Creek would have been a very different film had it been him.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think the thing with Edward Furlong, he just kind of blew everyone away. And in the actual film itself, you're thinking, right, you've got Edward Norton. Did I say Edward Furlong a second ago? You've got Edward Norton and you've got Richard Gere. So you've got this established. I think Gere may have even been Oscar winning by this point. I think he did win for Officer and a Gentleman, but I'd need to go and check. And you've got against this sort of essentially a noob, a guy who's never done a film before. And there was bits where Ed Norton was ad-libbing. There's a scene when they're together in almost like an interrogation room where Norton grabs Gere by like the cuff of his shirt and slams him up against the wall. That was ad-libbed. Richard Gere did not know that was coming. He just did it because he was so trying to kind of live that part, I suppose. And for someone to come into that situation, like first film, and be that confident. I mean, Ed Norton got nominated for an Oscar for this film. His first ever film role. I mean, obviously we know of him since American History X. Obviously Fight Club's been mentioned already.
Yeah, it's weird.
This
you just
was
take
the birth.
him for granted as an actor, but yeah, so it's really interesting seeing him in his first film, but not only a first big film alongside someone like Gere, but I think the really interesting thing with him is, well, obviously his character. So his character's called Aaron, I believe.
Aaron Stampler.
And to begin with, in this film, so we, as the audience, we think straight away, we think he's murdered the priest.
Cardinal.
Archbishop. Okay, that thing. Whatever.
One of those three religious things. Nun.
We think
it's definitely a nun.
We think he's murdered this bloke. He's all stuttery and vulnerable. He smiles, but he has this kind of nervous twitch and smile about him. That contrasted with Richard Gere, who at the beginning of this film is incredibly strong and confident, like we've said.
Yeah, in a room, Richard Gere walks in and there's all this confidence, and you've got kind of Ed Norton's character who's almost like
the polar opposite.
Completely polar opposite in a room. He's got no presence. He's sort of like, yes sir, yes sir. It's just all very much like that. Whereas, Richard Gere walks in, he's all like, I'm Richard Gere, here to save the day. And that is the kind of attitude the character has. I'm here to save you. Here's how we're going to do it. And it's just really awesome how obviously this film wraps up, that you get caught into this yourself, where it's like, oh yeah, Richard Gere's going to do his best to get this guy cleared, who we are still not 100% sure if he did it or not. We're pretty confident
it plays with you a bit there, doesn't it? Because there are moments in the film where you're like, oh, well, maybe he didn't do it. And, it's really clever in that kind of journey it takes you on, because much like Gere, you're a bit like the jury. You're trying to figure out if he did it. But you're right. You kind of think, oh, he's got to have done it. But then Richard Gere starts to have doubts as well.
Yeah. Well, quite early on, he kind of says to Edward Norton's character, like, oh, I believe you didn't do it. But then it's only later in the film where you actually think, oh, he actually believes that. He's not just saying it as part of his like charm to get on side with him.
There was someone else in that room.
There was a third person? That's the worst story I've ever heard in my entire life. Now it's our story.
He's the one.
You want to go one-on-one with me? I don't lose.
What's the matter, Marty? Been a while since you rubbed up against a woman with a brain?
Who's the real story?
Come on, ask it.
What about the truth?
The illusion of truth.
But he did kill him, right?
No, he didn't.
Don't tell me you think he didn't do it.
He wants to get his paycheck, he wants to get his exposure, he wants to be on TV, he loves watching himself on the news, that kind of thing. He's on the front of a magazine. Like, it is all about the fame for him. And I think it's also, part of the subplot is he used to work for the prosecutors, ended up leaving, so it was all a bad situation. Laura Linney obviously didn't, she stayed behind, and it's almost like a big two fingers up to the DOJ, essentially, who are kind of trying this case. And specifically as well, there's a character we've not discussed. So Fraser's dad, essentially, as most people is likely to know him. So John Mahoney, who for me is one of his finest roles, was in Hudsucker Proxy. Hudsucker Proxy. I can't even talk.
Wow.
Yeah, he's like the fast talking sort of newspaper runner who sets everyone out to do things. But yeah, like essentially Fraser's dad, and he plays a bastard in this.
Oh, he really does.
Quite a nasty piece of work, in fact, that is essentially someone who is trying to control the city to a large extent, trying to make lots of money, is engaging in some nefarious things, including like this slightly weird mafiosa style subplot, a guy that essentially Richard Gere has previously defended. They came to agreement that would give him a big payout if he leaves Chicago, essentially, and unfortunately that guy decides not to, and later on in the film he turns up dead in a lake. And yeah, it's all a bit like, whoa.
The biggest kind of like reveal in the film, again, that I'd forgotten about, is when it turns out, you're like, what could have possibly been the motivation for any of this? And then it turns out that the Archbishop was a bit of a naughty guy. Actually, a bit of a naughty guy who was probably a criminal, I think would be a fair way to put it. He had like his, I guess, the children
choir
of his
boys.
parish, I guess. Yeah, choir boys. Sorry, Smith, that is it. The choir boys.
And girls.
And choir girls, and would have them perform in front of him sexually. And he would film it. And
he'd do a sermon first, though, which is like even creepier.
It was even creepier. And he would record them on VHS tape, and for some reason keep these VHS tapes for anyone to find. And probably, and I've got to say, the most unbelievable scene in the movie. So Richard goes in to the crime scene. He's just let into the crime scene. He goes upstairs. This was the bizarre bit, but the most unbelievable bit is he gets the VHS tape out. That's the one.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, and he removes the label so effortlessly and puts it on the. And like, he basically swaps labels, and I'm thinking, whoever made that scene has never, ever tried to take a label off a VHS tape, because to get labels off VHS tapes, even if they'd been there for a day, was literally like, better get the white spirit out to get this. Because that glue is like, I don't know how to describe it. It could hold anything together.
I saw the tape. I know what he did to you.
Do you know what I would do if someone did that to me? I would stab him 78 times.
It's a mistake to stick your thumb in the eyes of the most powerful people in the city.
You're worse than the thugs you represent.
Objection, Your Honor.
Next thing you know, he'll be objecting if we want to bring in the murder weapon.
Well, now the chief brings it up.
We failed to mention about Francis McDormand's character, who is brought in by Richard Gere to essentially do an assessment of his mental well-being, because it's very obvious that if he is to have done this murder or whatever the hell has happened, he's quite a troubled young child. At least he's a troubled teenager now, at least, and had a very sort of checkered past. So she comes in and she starts filming him in the sort of interrogation room to get an idea of basically what's been going on. And it's there that we finally start to see there may be another side to his character rather than this shy, stuttering little choir boy.
And
turns out that other person is Roy.
Roy is basically what you think is
Roy Castle from Record Breakers. It's like, hey Cheryl, I'm on my trumpet.
Roy
doing his tap dancing. I love
his tap dancing. No, it turns out that Roy is it's like got a split personality or personality disorder, I think, is what they think to begin with. And Roy is much like the opposite of Aaron. He's strong and aggressive, and he
curses like a sailor.
Yeah, he picks Richard Gere up and pushes him, and he stands up to him. Then has these kind of like mini breakdowns, and Francis is kind of outside watching, and Gere is like pointing his finger as to say,
yeah, he's like, not yet. Don't come in.
Let me see.
Don't come in. Richard Gere's acting here. Do not come in.
But I love that. I mean, you want to talk about Ed Norton being nominated for an Oscar in this movie, and you can see why. Because, actors should be able to go from one character to the next, but to do it so convincingly, and it's obviously the kind of key for Ed Norton in terms of acting in this scene, the key to his change is that look when he's kind of looking down like, no, that's not true, and then he does that look up.
You son of a bitch, you fucking killed him.
No! What the hell you want from me now? Quit your crying, I can't understand a goddamn word you're saying. You little sissy, you make me sick. Well, looky here. Who the fuck are you?
Who the fuck are you?
Hey, this is my cell, Shagan. Who the fuck are you?
There's this underlying threat constantly that, Roy could just explode at any minute. And it's just like, oh, right. So suddenly now Richard Gere has, I've got a bargaining chip here.
Yeah, he's ill. What I love, just on that transformation, is then I'm thinking, okay, we've seen the transformation into Roy. Now, how does he transform back? And that's, I think, even more of a testament to Ed Norton in this film, that he cowers down and kind of holds his head. And because at that point, you're like, actually going back from this strong character into this weak thing must be really hard and demanding as an actor. But it's so convincing. I think Richard Gere playing alongside him in those scenes also does a really good job, because he's almost had to switch his role a little bit, and obviously he's kind of acting in the sense in as his character, in the sense that he's pretending that he's more scared and more, because he wants to find out more. So there's so many kind of layers to these two characters and what they're going through. And as we find out much later in the film, there's even more layers to that.
Just going back to sort of Edward Norton, and you kind of saying like his performance was fantastic. We mentioned obviously the slamming against the wall was ad-libbed. The stutter was ad-libbed.
Oh, wow.
And that was never in the script. That was something he thought would bring extra vulnerability to his character. So, again, to have that foresight to kind of think this is what's really going to work with this character in this role.
I like it when they're at the bar. It's Laura Linney and... I was going to say Ed Norton. Laura Linney and... Oh, God, who's the lead of this film? Richard Gere. Laura Linney and Richard Gere at the bar.
It's a film that just drives you to forget everything.
Everything,
Why? I don't know.
I don't know.
Just because there's a twist that it doesn't want you to know about.
They're in the bar talking about the case. This is when they're both on it. And Laura Linney says to Richard Gere about his client, she goes, that stutter, it's priceless. And I was like, that's such a good line. She's so good. I mean, I can't stress how good she is in this film. It's funny, like a week or two later, I just happened to be flicking channels and I was like, Truman Show's on. I start watching it.
That must be similar time to this as well. Like
about 3 years difference.
Wow.
This came out in 96.
I mean, how different is she in that?
But that's the thing. Like, I'd forgotten, maybe I'm having something else going on in my brain, but I completely forgot much of the Truman Show. I mean, I hadn't seen it in nearly 20 years or probably more. I thought, let me watch the Truman Show again. And I was like, Laura Linney's in this. No, wait, that's Laura Linney. So Laura Linney's in this, and yeah, like you say, I'd forgotten. And again, after like watching her in that as well, I started going through all the films she's been in. It's just like, bloody hell, that's quite the career, and also just what a screen presence. But I think she's so good in this movie. I think without her, this is a very different movie in terms of presence. And like we talked about how strong the cast is. But I think she brings so much to this role.
You loved him like a father. Even though he made you and your girlfriend perform demeaning sexual acts for his own gratification.
No, you don't understand. There was no other way for him to cast out his own demons. He needed it.
He needed to get off, Aaron. That's what he was doing.
Well, I think there's something about this film, like, to sort of look at perhaps some of the negatives, like, it kind of looks very much like a 90s, almost like a TV show rather than a film. The way it's shot.
That's literally my one criticism of this movie.
With the kind of running
as well. The music is
yeah.
appalling. Like, it is just like a CSI episode or something along that kind of ilk of TV.
It's not a visually interesting film, I don't think. There are moments, but I was like, why is that? And so I looked at the director, and to his name, he was primarily a TV director that had directed Hill Street Blues, NYPD Blue, and LA Law, which is a cool. So I'm watching this film, like I've watched it, I finished, and I was like, it just felt like, visually it felt like a TV drama. If he's going into this, even if he's directed movies before this, you're still going to be carrying with you that TV mindset. Whereas you look at something like, I know Oliver Stone's a very different director. If you look at Oliver Stone with JFK, his courtroom scenes, obviously it's Oliver Stone, so it's like, I'm going to have 700 cuts between each of these, shots. And I love JFK. I think it's a great movie. But yeah, it's you watch that and it's like, that's how you do an engaging courtroom scene. I just found
even with some of the other scenes, right? Like one of the most shocking but almost out of the blue scenes is the death of the guy, which we've not actually mentioned. And you see
when they chop his hand.
Yeah,
off
all you see is a hand and a knife go bang, and you see the chomp. But you're right. I didn't really think about this, but it does look quite hammy and TV-ish. And although it's kind of shocking, it's not. And then afterwards he's like running, and there's lots of running and like a bit of montagey music. At the time I gave it to a bit of forgiveness that it's kind of 90s, but actually it's quite late 90s, but it felt a lot earlier than that, and that is basically your point really on the kind of TV thing.
I think that's a testament, though, as you said, to the acting and the script, is that
it carries
because
through,
there isn't that distraction. Yeah, there's not the distraction of like, oh, here's a swanky shot, or here's like a piece of the score or the music that makes a big difference. Because that is almost so bland, it makes the actual performances stand out even more, which is something I've not seen in many films at all.
No, I agree.
To be totally honest, and it was. it was really surprising that a film that, I mean, this was a big film. We mentioned, obviously, it got Oscar nominated, a star name like Richard Gere in it as well. It did very well at the time, I think, in terms of box office, because it was based on a very famous book. $30 million to make. It does not look like a $30 million movie. A lot of that, I imagine, went on actors' salaries. But made over $100 million as well. So again, it was a film that did exceptionally well at the time. But yeah, looks a bit like A Dog's Dinner, but it has that quality in it, which is quite surprising, really. And yeah, we've touched upon like the supporting cast. Like there's a lot of people who are in quite good TV shows. So you obviously mentioned the guy from your mate Captain Holt from
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Yeah.
From Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You've got an actress who I actually really like called Maura Tierney, who used to be in ER. She was really good in that.
She's in The Affair as well, was she?
Oh, that's that newish one with what's
Dominic
his face
West.
from The Wire in Dominic
Is it
West.
the woman with, if I'm thinking of the right person, the woman with the lips?
The woman with the lips.
No, it was the woman who had dog ears. I'm going to take your word for it.
That's the woman that doesn't have any lips.
Another sort of famous actor, TV star, and it was Terry O'Quinn, who you probably remember as Locke in the TV show Lost, that was obviously absolutely huge not that long ago, who has a relatively small role. But it's interesting that basically top caliber TV actors are in a film that we're saying looks quite a bit like a TV show, but it all seems to kind of tie together because of the quality of the acting.
Did you know you can now subscribe to Off Radar It's a Movie podcast on YouTube? You can watch exclusive trailers and listen to brand new full episodes. All links and info in the description down below.
Somebody stop me!
I was going to say, when Aaron's put on the stand and Richard Gere's plan is, I'm going to get, because Laura Linney and all her prosecution team are like, Aaron Stampler is just someone putting on an act, trying to be this frail boy who apparently has this multiple personality disorder, all this stuff.
Which Richard Gere isn't allowed to plead like insanity or mental health, because he doesn't at the start, because they weren't aware of this. So
they weren't aware of this.
The tape got revealed, which Laura Linney did it against the advice of Fraser's dad, who him and the dog were very unhappy about that. His dog, you know, when he sits in his chair, they were like, don't do the tape, for goodness sake. Like, it's got a sticky back, it's going to be a nightmare. And she's like, balls to this, going with the tape. And then, as you say, we're in a situation where Gere's like, he sort of whispers something to him, doesn't he, to try and rile up.
He tries to bring him out like the Hulk.
Yeah, he's trying to bring Roy out. So he basically kind of rolls up, then walks away and says, you know, Laura Linney,
your witness.
Your witness. So Laura Linney goes up and decides, right, I'm gonna, just question Aaron Stampler. So she asks multiple questions, but Richard Gere knows it's starting to. He knows that Laura Linney is going to press.
Another face of a man that we all thought that we knew.
No.
Do you know what I would do if someone did that to me? I would kill him. I wouldn't hesitate.
No.
I would stab him 78 times with a butcher knife. I would chop off his fingers. I would slash his throat open. I would carve numbers into his chest. I would gouge out his eyes. I swear to God. But that's me. No further questions, Your Honor.
Where the hell do you think you're going?
Excuse me?
Hey, you look at me when I'm talking to you, bitch. Mrs. Stampler. Fuck you, lady. Come here.
Order! Bailiff! Order!
Come here, you want my brother?
I talk about, criticise the way it's directed, but this scene is done really well, where she's, questioning him, and then at one point she goes, she kind of calls him to break down. She goes, no further questions, Ron, and walks away. And then Roy looks up and he's like, where the hell do you think you're going? She's like, excuse me, and he jumps up and he leaps after, and you're like, oh my goodness, and he attacks her. Richard Gere gets involved trying to separate them. Yeah, it's a traumatic scene.
No, don't you. No.
The case does get thrown out, so essentially they say that he needs to go for psychiatric treatment with the assumption that he will be out relatively soon. So he's almost away scot-free. So what happens?
Go on.
Do we spoiler alert?
Yeah,
if you've not watched this film.
I mean, all of this has kind of
to
had
be
little, like you say, like onion kind of spoilers as we go along.
Onion spoilers, is that a new thing?
Yeah. The old onion spoiler.
But I think this is.
That sounds like a 1940s film to the old onion spoiler.
That's a known method. But
that sounds like a Hammer horror film from the 90s.
This is the biggest onion in the spoiler.
Like a minute.
Richard Gere goes in. He's all smiles, isn't he? He's all like,
yeah, and they're like, oh, brilliant, we've tied this up. Jobs are good and son. Yeah, I'll see you for a beer later. That doesn't actually happen, but it's something along those to that extent. And then just as he's walking out, Ed Norton says, "Oh, say sorry to Janet." Yeah, say sorry to Terry Venables. Shouldn't have gone with the Christmas tree formation. No, he says, say sorry to her. Like, I didn't mean to strangle her. When actually, because he had flipped into Roy, every time he flips into Roy, his memory, what did he say he calls it? It's like a blackout, essentially.
Yeah, he has a blackout.
Loses time, I think he says.
Yeah, loses
like
time,
that. So how does he recollect this? How does he know? And so Richard Gere comes back and he's like, but you said, like, you didn't know. And then
he had a Columbo moment.
I think it's a slow clap, isn't it?
What did you just say?
What?
You told me you don't remember. You black out.
Well, good for you, Marty.
And then it basically turns out, he goes, so there never was a Roy.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. Marty, there never was an Aaron. And you're like, oh my God, who is this dude?
We're a great team, you and me. You think I could have done this without you? You're just feeling a little anger here because you started to care about old Aaron. I can understand that, but you know, love hurts, Marty. What can I say?
And did you guys see that coming? Did you see the twist coming?
I remember 20 minutes in. So when I watched it most recently, I was like, oh yeah, this is the film when that happens.
Okay.
But I was doubting myself all the way through. I was like, I think that's the case. And it was, and I watched it with with Helen as well, my wife, and she hadn't seen the film before, and she didn't see it coming.
Obviously, I hadn't seen it for the first watch, and I didn't see it coming at all. I mean, there's moments where you're kind of like, something else is going to happen in this film, because I think, you know, the little kind of clues throughout the film, there's always something, there's like little mini
but it kind
twists.
of leans more into it being a conspiracy, like John Mahoney's character has done something really bad, rather than, oh actually no, it was just Ed Norton, because like that's the most obvious answer, that it was Aaron all along.
It is in some ways, it is really obvious, which is the beauty of that twist. I think
I would say it's up there in movie twists with
Crying Game?
I was going to actually say The Usual Suspects, or perhaps
Fight Club?
No, the one with Bruce Willis in
Sixth Sense.
Oh, Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense, that kind of. But yeah, Fight Club. Well, obviously it's Edward Norton as well, Fight Club.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're probably right, Smith. Crying Game. It's that kind of level, and I think that's what probably got the voters' attention for this, for the Oscars, was the fact it's such a big, unexpected twist, and it adds, like you say, all those layers to the characters and everything else that it does. It kind of it leaves your jaw on the floor a little bit.
It elevates the film, which at that point was like, oh yeah, this is good, and then all of a sudden there's that moment where you're like, oh wow.
What I love about that, because the first time I saw it, I didn't see it coming. That was when I saw it all those many years ago. But but I remembered like that one scene. So from the film, if you would say, what's Primal Fear about? I would have always said, oh, it's a film where at the end this happens. And you get like there's a weird twisted sense of humor, obviously, to Roy. You get the sense of, I'm so glad you're seeing who I really am, Marty, because I'm brilliant, I'm a genius. But I think there's also, he feels that I get the impression that he does feel a kind of kinship to Marty.
Oh, definitely.
Because he actually says, like, I thought you would have figured it out. I thought you had it figured out ages ago. And it's like, oh wow, so he actually, he kind of respected Richard Gere in the sense of, oh no, this guy's probably clocked it. And so when Richard Gere, and Richard Gere plays it fantastically, when he walks out of that prison, having the reveal happen, you can see he's just utterly gone. He's just drained. And the beauty of it is, this is what I was going to mention earlier, is that, he's all about headlines. He's all about Richard Gere, Martin Vale being like, I'm the man that cleared this innocent man, or et cetera, and it's all about all the press outside the front taking his photo, and him standing there going, and at the very end of the film, he goes out the back way, and I love that. He exits the courthouse out the back.
We kind of mentioned earlier about how his character, he doesn't want to know if they're guilty or not. He doesn't really care. He just wants to get them off. But in this one, not only did he get them off, he finds out that not only is he guilty, he's pretty awful kind of human being. Murdered 2 people in cold blood, and it's like, God, he's partly responsible. Well, he's almost wholly responsible for that person being able to walk free.
And that's it. And that's where that morality that we start with comes back at the end to the crescendo of how he really is thinking, because like I said earlier in the film, there's moments where you question it, but to that point at the end where he's all of a sudden he's like, fuck, what have I done? Very clever. Trivia, Nige, give us some trivia on this film.
Trivia.
Trivia.
So we mentioned, obviously, it could have been Leo, it could have been a bunch of other people. I think Will Wheaton.
Will Smith.
Weldon, the guy from Star Trek, was also...
Oh, Will Wheaton, yeah.
Will Wheaton was very close. But one of the biggest people to not get the role as Aaron...
Jack Nicholson.
Was in fact James Eatock.
What?
No, was in fact Matt Damon. So
Wow.
Matt Damon was desperate for the role.
I could see that, though.
He was desperate for a role in Dead Poets Society as well, which he missed out on. And this. So after being passed over yet again, he teamed up with his good friend Ben Affleck and said, look, we're never going to get cast in these films. We're always sort of thrown against the wolves. Let's write our own film. And lo and behold, that became Good Will Hunting. So without him not getting this film, there would have been no Good Will Hunting, which came out a year later.
Interestingly, Matt Damon's character in a film we did, Talented Mr. Ripley, not far away from this kind of thing either.
Nice comparison.
Yeah, an itch he finally got to scratch, so to speak.
Ratings. Michael, who recommended this, we will do your rating and review last. I am going to ask... Nige, what did you think and what is your rating of this film?
Nige winced then. That was interesting.
Oh, it's Nige up first. To be honest, I think we've kind of gone over most of the points I wanted to raise. Like, it's a really well acted film. It's a really interesting film. It's got a great script, a great cast. Not that fantastically well shot. The music is just straight out of like songs from from average legal TV shows. It's just like doobie 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 doo,
doobie doobie doo.
And there's a bit like we didn't even really touch upon like the subplot mafiosa bit where he gets a CD and he's playing the CD a bit, and it's just like, meh, forget about it. See what I did there? Yeah, he's good. But honestly, the performances are exceptional. And I think, as I said, it kind of draws you even more into those by being kind of a little bit bland.
I get it.
And for me, I'll never figure out why everyone just forgets this film, why it's in like a Bermuda Triangle of like film knowledge. I'm really good for remembering films. I kind of pride myself on it. But with this one, it's just like, So I look forward to watching it in another 6 months and being like, what the hell happens in this? But I'm actually quite a big fan of this, more so than I expected to be, and it's a bit borderline, but I'm actually going to give it an 8 out of 10. Because I think, like, we've reviewed a couple of, we certainly reviewed at least one sort of law drama previously, the one with
the trial of Chicago 7.
Chicago 7.
And compared to that, this film is superior. Like, it doesn't look as good. It's probably not even got the same kind of high tempo pace, but there's something about it. It's just that layer of quality for me that makes it a much better film. And like at the end of the film, my wife turned to me and said, why do they not make more legal films like this? And I'm like, there's thousands of them.
There are a lot,
but that's how much she enjoyed it as well. And it's just a really solid film. And yeah, it's never going to be one of those that's like top of the greatest films of all time list, but it's one of those
unless it has Muppets in it.
Oh, that's true. You need Muppets to get
absolutely. Instead of Ed Norton, you've got Rizzo the Rat.
Exactly. Imagine what it would have been like with that. I imagine someone's done that out there. But
I hope so.
Yeah, it's a really, really solid film. For me, an 8 out of 10.
Fair enough.
8 out of 10.
Etok, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, like Nige said, I think we covered so many points, and I agree a lot with what Nige said. The mafia point, the mafia subplot, whatever it was, just seems to take up a little bit more of the film that it needs to. I thought the film was actually a bit too long. When I looked at the runtime, I was like, this feels, I think because of its nature, as we've said, being quite a made-for-TV movie, it should be like 90 minutes, but I'm sure, I think it was like 2 hours unless I'm mistaken. Or it felt like 2 hours anyway. But yeah, the mafia plot I just didn't think went anywhere. The direction, I knocked off a few points for me. Incredible cast, like top of the real bloody good cast. But yeah, for me it just didn't really grabbed me. I actually went in thinking I was going to give this a huge rating. I was like, Primal Fear, Ed Norton, Richard Gere. I remember really enjoying this film, even though I couldn't remember anything about it. So, with all that said, I'm giving it a 6.5.
Nice. Yeah, fair enough. Well, I'd never seen this film until you recommended it, Michael. I went away and watched it. I instantly forgot it, but I remember enjoying it, like the first watch. I don't know why I forgot it, but I've watched it today. That's how fresh it is for me. So yeah, I kind of echo both of what you said, really. I think the writing's really slick. The cast do a really good job. It's adapted well from a book. Sometimes, films from books are never as good as the book, but then again, I've never read the book, so I can't really compare, can I?
I love that, yeah.
But, like Richard Gere, like I said, like not really seen him before. Well, I have seen him, but, like for me, he's kind of gone missing from my radar for the last 20 years. I've not really watched much of his work for a long time, so it's nice to see him in a film. But I think...
Oh, there he is. It's Richard Gere. Oh, it's nice to see him.
Nice to see you.
That was so good the way you said that, like a caring aunt.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really watchable, but I just didn't fall in love with this film. Like, it's not actually a film I would probably choose to watch again, like, especially after watching it twice. But, like, I did enjoy, like, the credentials of it and what they've done with it. It was just a really good, well-rounded film. So for me, it's a 7 out of 10.
Oh, 7 out of 10. So 6.5, 7 and 8.
I think I'd have probably gone 7.5 if I could give
halves.
Well,
you can.
No, I cannot.
Michael.
No.
I was...
Michael's right.
This is what Michael wrote. I was worried when rewatching this that it would not be as good as I remember it. But nope, I enjoyed every moment of this movie. I don't want to spoil anything. Well, we've spoiled it, so it doesn't matter. Before you watch, so I'll be brief. I still really enjoy the story. It starts from the murder and the intrigue and progresses well with its different strands of what's going on with Ed Norton's character, as well as the larger story about the priest, the gangster at play. The performances of a young Ed Norton, in particular Frances McDormand, I think are excellent and crucial to the movie. But there are so many good performances, including Fraser's dad, as you said, whose name I cannot remember.
Yay.
So Michael
has
given this film, brace yourselves, a 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10?
No one will ever change my mind.
We're not here to do that.
Really not. And fair play. And thank you for recommending that, because...
we're going to pop around and tickle him and be like, go on, change your mind.
Oh, he's right. That's what they do in Hollywood. You wonder why certain films are recommended for Oscar nominations. It's the old tickle tactic.
So yeah, well, thank you, Michael. And guys, what do you think of Primal Fear? Get in touch. Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com. Tweet us at offradarpodcast. Follow us on YouTube, on Facebook. Come around Etok's house, find him, ask him what he thinks of it. Get in touch and let us know a film to suggest next time. Oh my God, so vulnerable.
What?
Just went a bit crazy.
Give me a tickle. Where did that come from?
I was trying to be Ed Norton, but it didn't. It came out as I don't know.
You just came across as Creepy Smith.
I was going to say, you just sounded like, I thought Smith was just being like, oh, finally Smith's here.
Or is it? We need your help. We are looking to grow Off Radar and release more and more high quality content. Please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your pod. And why not share with your friends and loved ones?
Help me help you.